Okay, good evening everybody. It's our last meeting of this month and Pesach is rapidly approaching and I wanted to speak a little bit tonight about Pesach. As we know that there are 4 questions on Pesach. Somebody once made a joke that there are actually 5 questions on Pesach. The fifth question is, when do we eat? Right. It's an old joke, but as Not a Schiller should be well said, there's no such thing as an old joke, just old audiences. Being as it may, the joke has all jokes have to have some kind of truth to them, otherwise they're not funny. And I think what that joke really represents is the fact that in some ways it's very easy to lose sight of what exactly we're supposed to be getting from the Seder. The Haggadah, a lot of times it depends on different families. You may different kinds of challenges. If you're in a Seder where, of course, hopefully you'll be seeing the kosher Seder, but even a lot of kosher Sedorim may not want to go into too much detail, and there might be some Sedorim where they go into too much detail for you and you lose the plot. So I wanted to try and give you tonight something that you could hold on to, maybe just one idea that will hopefully transform your Seder. What is it exactly? What should I be feeling at the Seder? What should I be looking for? So basically what we're going to be talking about tonight is the Ramchal, Chaim Letzato. And we discussed this last year, but it's worthwhile to examine these ideas every year. There are 2 basic approaches to what a person should be getting out of the Seder. One is the Ramban, and we've discussed that quite recently, so I may go into it later on if we have time, but the Ramban is more derech hapshat, more the more obvious, more straightforward meaning of Pesach, and the Ramchal deals with, let's say, a more Kabbalistic interpretation, which is what I want to speak about tonight. The Ramchal, the basis of the Ramchal's idea is when a person does a mitzvah, even if a person just does the mitzvahs without the correct machshavas, without the correct thoughts and intentions, kavanas, this is something which changes his mahut, his very essence. The mitzvahs of the Seder have a power to change us. And just as Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, created a fundamental change in the mahut, in the essence of the Jewish people, Klal Yisrael. So similarly, when we perform the mitzvahs of the Seder, and we do those kafi halacha, according to the halacha, in the prescribed way, they have an effect on us, a deep spiritual effect on us, even though they're seemingly simple, anodyne even, physical expressions, eating a bit of matzah, eating a bit of bitter herb, relaying the story of the coming out of Egypt, even though these things seem to be fairly kind of, how do they work? I think somebody once said, something, if you really look at the Seder, it really doesn't give you much of an experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. If you really wanted to experience coming out of Egypt, so I've got a much better idea. Why don't we get everybody together on the night of Pesach, and we'll dress half the people up as slaves, Jewish slaves, and we'll dress the other half up as Egyptian taskmasters. And then for the first half of the evening, the Egyptian taskmasters will thrash the living daylights out of the slaves, and then, just to be fair, just before midnight we'll turn around and everybody will do the reverse. We'll change costumes. I'm sure you'd experience the idea of coming out from slavery to freedom in a much more stark, much more strong way. And the answer is that that's true, that on the surface one might experience the deliverance in a very physical way, but you wouldn't experience that, what the Seder is going to do to us if we do it in the right way, what it's capable of doing. Again, the idea of the Ramchal is that a mitzvah acts upon our physical body in a way that physical things don't actually get to. Physical things are, in a sense, too gross, too simple, too obvious. And the Yetzer Hara has a way of diverting those from really entering into our soul. And we need subtle things to sneak, so to speak, under the radar. I'm reminded of a lovely story about Rav Shlomo Wolbe Zatzal. Rav Wolbe was invited to go out, and this must have been, I think, in the 70, in the war, not the 6-Day War, the war after that, the Yom Kippur War, thank you. When the Israeli troops were already over there in Egypt, in Africa, as they used to say. The troops were in Africa, and they wanted to fly Rav Wolbe over to give the troops some chizuk, some encouragement, strengthen their resolve. And so, of course, there were no commercial airlines at the time to fly to Egypt, certainly not to a war zone. So they put him in a two-seater fighter jet. The pilot was in the front and he was in the back. And as they go over the Suez Canal, over the border, suddenly this fighter jet drops down to about 50 feet off the dirt, off the desert floor, and starts to go very fast. And Rav Wolbe got scared, he was concerned. He said to the pilot, "Is everything all right?" He said, the pilot said, yeah, we're fine. I'm just getting under the enemy radar. And he took a Musa Haskell, an idea from that when a person wants to do anything significant, he has to get under the enemy radar. We've all stood on Yom Kippur, and we've taken all these, enormous kabbalot, these great undertakings, these lahavdil New Year's resolutions, and they're never revolutions. They fall away very quickly, usually in direct proportion to the size of the acceptance of some new and difficult thing to do. If you really want to change yourself, it has to be done very, very incrementally, very, very slowly. You have to get under the enemy radar. If you say on Yom Kippur, I'm never going to speak Lashon Hara again, I'm never going to speak improper speech, I'm never going to look where I'm not supposed to look, the Yetzer Hara sits there laughing his head off. But if you take upon yourself something very small, like, for example, that you'll bench from a Seder when you eat bread every, let's say, Sunday morning or Sunday evening, whenever you have your meal with bread, once a week. You do that and you keep to it. It's a small thing, but it has an enormous effect on a person. So the mitzvahs of the Seder seemingly are anodyne, rather without power. A bit of matzah, a bit of charoses, a bit of romaine lettuce here in Israel. The minhag is to have lettuce. We don't even have the horseradish that I remember from my youth, which was certainly bitter. What's going on? So, as I said before, the Yetzias Mitzrayim, coming out of Egypt, created a fundamental change in the body, physically, the body of the Jewish people. The idea is that the physical is capable of accepting spirituality, but it depends on the preparation of the physical. For example, a baby boy who is not mahul, he's not circumcised, has a lower ability to ingest spirituality. His body is less spiritualizable, if you like, than a baby who after he's had his bris milah. So let's go from the very beginning, the beginning of history. Adam HaRishon, the first man, came into this world. He wasn't born. He came into this world on a very, very high spiritual level. Even physical things can be on a very high spiritual level. Meaning that when somebody on that level, the level of Adam HaRishon, the first man, does even physical things, the most physical things, it doesn't make him more physical. Us, when we indulge ourselves in physical things, and we don't do them in the correct way, they make us more physical, more drawn to physicality. But Adam HaRishon was on such a high level that even the most physical things in his life did not make him more physical. It says, the Chazal teaches that Adam's body was as though it was transparent. His body was not connected to what we would call gashmiut, physicality. His soul shone through the body, it was transparent, like a light. And the light was not dimmed by the body. However, because Adam was physical, his body had the potential to become gashmi, physicalized. And when he ate from the fruit, he unfortunately actualized the potential of the body to become gashmi. And as a result of that, chet, that sin, the body then desired tava, physical desires, kovod, honor. The body became coarsened. When we do a mitzvah, our body changes. Our body changes physically. You can't see it, but the actual physical composition of the body changes. The physical body becomes more inclined to do good. There's something that a person has inside we call the nefesh habahamis, which literally means the animal soul. Now, the animal soul is in every living creature, and the animal soul, the nefesh habahamis, can be raised or lowered. When we do a mitzvah, the nefesh habahamis in a person ascends, becomes less physical and more spiritual, and the reverse when a person chalila does an aveira. The chet of Adam Harishon, of the first man, the sin of Adam Harishon, meant the tragedy of it was that up till that point, man could have been mistabek. He could have cleaved to Hashem, even in this world. As the result of the chet, it meant that the physical body, that a person could no longer be close to Hashem, and therefore the only way that this close to Hashem could be achieved was through death, the decomposition of the body, and the eventual reunification of the body and the soul in the world to come. The body also has to be, according to the Ramchal, reunified with the soul, because the body was a partner with the soul in its journey in this world, and through the agency of the body, the soul was able to do all the mitzvahs that it did. And therefore the guf, the body, also has to receive its reward. But it's not possible now for a person to go, as a result of the chet of Adam Harishon, straight to Olam Haba. The body has to decompose and be rebuilt. And in Olam Haba, that's when the ultimate pleasure will be. The Ramchal speaks about this in Derech Hashem and also in Mesilas Yesharim. To bask in the ziv shchinosoi of Yisborach Shemo, and to bask in the divine radiance, that ultimate pleasure that we were created for. So, Adam Harishon brought so much darkness into the world, so much ra, so much evil, that, as we said, the only way that a person could purify his body to be a fit vessel, a kli, to bask in the Shechina, in the ziv, the radiance of the Shekhinah, was either by working on himself to an incredible degree or through Yisurim. Yisurim means afflictions. The Jewish idea of an affliction is never vindictive. When a person suffering, in the Jewish idea of things, is always remedial. Suffering is always something which purifies a person. So Adam Harishon brought so much darkness, so much ra into the world, that it was impossible for man to go to Olam Haba without affliction, and the process of death is a painful process, even after the death it's painful. There's a thing called the Kafakala, where the soul is literally slung like a slingshot from one end of the world to the other, that a person loses his orientation. He had a body before, now he's dead, he doesn't have a body. But his body was the means by which he interfaced with the world. So to the extent that a person was involved in this world, so is the pain that he feels at not being able to experience. He has the same desires, but the inability to realize those desires.
In what case is that?
This is what happens to a person when the more physically involved in this world he is, the more difficult it is for the neshama to leave. I'll give you an example. Rav Dessler Zatzal apparently sold everything that he had before he left. He divested himself of everything, and he even sold the paper on which he wrote his will. Because
Before he died? Before he died, you're saying?
Before he died. because he wanted to have the absolute minimum contact with this world when he left the world. Because the more involved the person is in this world, the more difficult he finds it. The process of death. Chibur tekeva, the pain of the decomposition in the grave.
There's pain for that too?
Yes. There's a person experiences tremendous pain to the extent that he's involved in his. But all of these things are a kapara. All of these things purify a person. So his body can be a fit kli, a vessel that he can enter into olam hazeh.
It's like
either
clean it the easy way or the hard way.
Okay, so very good. So the way to clean it the easy way is actually not so easy, because only very few people were able to purify themselves to the extent that they were able to have, to the degree that they went through a minimal amount. I don't know exactly how much, but Avram Avinu, Yitzchak Avinu, Yaakov Avinu, Noach, and Sem Mesushelach, it's translated into English as Methuselah. They were the only people who were able to purify themselves to the nth degree.
Not Moshe?
Apparently not. Not Moshe. So basically, in human history, the punishment, the affliction that a person is, as we're saying, is to purify a person. So the 20 generations between Adam, Harishon, and Abraham, there were hundreds of years there with no Torah, no mitzvahs, and the reason is that was a process of purification. The suffering of that world is the world had to go through a period of cleansing of hundreds of years. All there was, this is before Matan Torah, there were only 7 mitzvahs. The 7 mitzvahs did not make the world a better place. They just preserved the social structure. There was no tikkun ha'olamas through them. So all of that, putting up with this world, being soivel olam hazeh, those hundreds of years took the ra, to a certain extent, the evil out of the world. But in order for the Klal Yisrael to reach a point where they could be nis'aleh, raised up, to be dovek in Hashem, to be close to Hashem, they had to go through an intense period of yisurim, of suffering, to purify their bodies so their bodies would be fit as kelim, as vessels to receive the Torah. Which of course, as we said, means that the guf will be able to go to Olam Haba. And that was the years that were spent in Mitzrayim. That was the finishing off of the process by which the body of man was purified to the extent that he could receive, the Jewish people then were able to receive the Torah. So, on the night of the Seder, we reenact the Yetziah. Exactly the same thing happens. The Derech Hashem explains that time is cyclical. We tend to think of time as linear. It's not. The Jewish concept of time is that really everything goes around, like if you remember you had a train set when you were a kid. Every child's train set has one thing in common, that however big and however elaborate it may be, it always goes in a circle. So you always there's a platform, there's a station called Shabbos. Every 7 days you're going to go back to that. It's the same Shabbos. Every time we experience Shabbos, every time we keep Shabbos, we're basically going through the same station called Shabbos. The first Shabbos is the same. It's the same spiritual vista. True, in terms of time it's linear, but actually in terms of what's being radiated down from upstairs, it's the same. And so therefore, Pesach, exactly the same spiritual vista, exactly the same potential exists in every Seder as at the first Yetzias Mitzrayim. That same raising up of the body. The same hashbahs are there.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Before you were saying that the physical can receive spiritual influence, sometimes the physical body can receive spiritual things, can have more of an influence on a physical body than physical things can, right? You said that? But you said that the spiritual things need to be sneaky so as to get around the Yetzer Hara. The spiritual things, that was the idea that the physical ways of those spiritual things
sometimes if they're too physical, we're not able to absorb them in the correct way.
But you said the Yetzer Hara was the one who kind of is the gatekeeper?
Well, I mean, the Yetzer Hara is the power that wants to stop us becoming more spiritual and become more physical. That's his job.
Right, so why would it be that the Yetzer Hara will stop physical things from having a physical?
No, I'm saying that that's just giving you maybe an idea of why it is that the mitzvahs which are physical, but they're actually quite subtle things physically. They're not
like putting on tefillin is like a subtle thing.
It's a subtle thing. I mean, I gave you the example of experiencing coming out from Egypt. If everybody got dressed up in the costumes and there was this like big, nowadays I don't know. We'd watch this, experience this IMAX presentation of coming out from Egypt. Maybe we'd feel, in some senses, much more connected to that, but it wouldn't actually push the right spiritual buttons because the mitzvahs are physical, but they are exquisitely tuned to create certain spiritual connections between us and what is being radiated down at that particular time of the year.
That's the subtlety that you're...
Yeah.
So if Mizraim was the epitome of us coming to the physical, us suffering in Mizraim helped us gain more spiritual, spiritual flow, our ability to intake spiritual. But that was inflicted by God. So what about self-affliction for suffering? Not for I'm just going to make myself in pain, but let's say for working out, right? I work out in order to, I know that my muscles will break apart in order for me to grow back. What about the self-suffering, knowing that it's going to help you become more spiritual? Or should that be left up to God? Like you don't ask God for a challenge.
I mean, there are people, and there were people certainly in the past who took upon themselves physically challenging things. Nowadays, we're on a very, very low level. So I think a person has to be very careful. It's enough that we fast on the fast that Chazal have prescribed, Yom Kippur, and the Tainus Esther, Shivas B'Tammuz, Sarah B'Tevis, etc., etc. And there are people who fast every Monday and Thursday. And there's a fast I believe that started as like a 3-day fast that there's a great rabbi, I'm not going to say his name, who I learnt with once, who said that a person shouldn't do it because it's very, very difficult.
For Bahab?
No. This is a 3-day fast and you break the fast on Shabbos.
Every week or just...
No, I mean, to do it even once. I mean, it's just...
Oh, without drinking or anything? 3 days?
I'm not sure. I think so, yes. It was I think three, I'm not sure, three whole days. But anyway, it was a very, very, very long fast, something that we would never think of doing. And he said to us that it's very difficult and the person shouldn't do it. So if he told me that the person shouldn't do it, obviously he'd done it. Right? So I'm not saying, I mean, in every generation there are the people who maybe are on that level, who certainly I know people who fast every Monday and Thursday. I mean, not 24 hours, but like between sunrise and sunset. But a person has to be very, very careful not to exceed his level. And halavai, we should be able to fulfill everything that says in the Shulchan Aruch properly. And when we've done that, and we're sure we're on that level, then okay, maybe we can, try a little bit. For sure, a person should always try to push the edges of the envelope. But you should still stay within the envelope. It's a question of understanding who you are and understanding what you're capable of, and maybe I could move a little bit better in this way. But I think it's very dangerous to try and, unilaterally do things which are physically very difficult, because in the long run, they're counterproductive a lot of the time. A person is like a spring, the Yetzer Hara. If you push it down too hard, it'll spring back at you and you'll lose out completely. Okay, but there was something you said that I wanted to, this idea of the physical, so I'm sure it'll carry on, the idea of the physical body. In other words, every time a person plugs into the mitzvahs of the Seder, he's plugging into 3,000 years of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Every time that we revisit that landscape, we are benefiting from all of those Sedorim that came before us. All of that spirituality is stored up, waiting for us, that we can be, and Ramchal's going to say that this eventually will bring the Geula. It's like filling up a cup. Every Seder we fill that cup a little bit higher.
Is that to say that the first Siddharim were less spiritual?
No,
Because like the people were much greater?
it's really like if you want to take a marshal of like one of those machines that when you put enough sand in it, the whole thing, sort of flips. So Avram Avinu, maybe got a sort of like a thing this big of sand, and when it gets to the top, then it pushes down the thing, and Mashiach comes. So maybe Avram Avinu could put this much in, right? And until and Moshe Rabbeinu and all of the Rishonim, the Achronim, the Tanoim, they built it up. Now maybe you and I can only put 1 grain of sand in, but it could be that it's that 1 grain of sand which will tip the whole thing. So it's true. They were on a much greater level than us, but what we're able to do, because we have the even though on our lower level, but we have the ability, because we're standing right at the end of history for us, we may be on a much lower level, but even with what we're doing now could be critical. It will be critical. Yeah. Okay, so I'd like now to actually take out and see the Ramchal inside. So this basic idea, the idea is that when we fulfill the mitzvahs of the Seder, we are changing our physical body. This is what a person should think about at the Seder. While I'm eating this matzah is making me into a more spiritual person. I may not feel it, it's totally not obvious, but by doing this, by eating this matzah, by performing the mitzvahs, I'm plugging into 3,000 years of Yetzias Mitzrayim. I am becoming a holier, higher person, and I am, by doing this, helping to bring the Geula Shlema. That, if a person can keep that in his mind while he's doing the mitzvahs, then in spite of the children jumping around the table and everybody wanted to say Manishtana, in a big family you could probably spend 20 minutes, half an hour Manishtana, and everything that's going on, or you're listening to a Devar Torah that you don't understand, or whatever it is, whatever other distractions, or you're feeling maybe, whatever it is, whatever's going on at the Seder, if you can just keep this idea in mind, I am becoming a holier person by doing these mitzvahs. This is really encapsulated in what the Ramchal says in what's called the Maimah HaChochma, which is, if you look at Kuf Ayin, you have this piece of paper that says Kuf Ayin here. I'm going to read very quickly and translate in Hebrew. Inyan Seder Leil Pesach. Everyone has it?
No.
It's here. Kuf Ayin at the bottom. Inyan Seder Leil Pesach. So, Hinei b'Yetzias Mitzrayim Nivru Yisrael Nivdolim Mikola Amim Lios Misalim b'Madregosam b'Madregas Hanoshias Achumrias Lios Royim L'Sater b'Atoras HaKedusha. I'm not going to read in Hebrew. I'm going to save time by just translating.
Which sefer is this?
Maimah HaChochma, which is the essay of wisdom by the Ramchal. Usually you can find it at the back of Derech Hashem. It's available. Says the Ramchal, behold, with the exodus from Egypt, the Jewish people were like clarified and separated from all the nations to be elevated from their physical, normal level of physical chumrius, and to be fit, to be crowned with crowns of holiness. And that which until that time was this physical darkness which dominated the body and caused the light of the Torah, the Holy Torah, that it shouldn't be able to shine. He's hinting to a Kabbalistic concept here, which is called the klipa. The idea is that the light is inside. The light of the Torah is always there, but it's shrouded by these things called the klipot. Where klipa basically means a shell. The concept is that the light of the Torah doesn't shine into the world because of the klipot, these shells which are opaque and prevent the light from shining out. he says, behold, after the Jewish people had suffered the afflictions and the shibud, how do you say shibud in English? The subjugation, thank you. Great subjugation that they suffered. Nispaisa midas adin. Let's explain this. So the midas adin, the aspect by which Hashem rules the world, which is called strict justice, din, was appeased. In other words, the accuser, the midas adin, says, how can you give Klal Yisrael the Torah? They're not fit for it. They're steeped in the flesh pots. So after the suffering the Jewish people went through, so to speak, the midas adin had nothing left to say. He couldn't be mekatreg. He couldn't accuse. He couldn't contradict. And therefore the accuser, the prosecuting angel, so to speak, was left without any kind of taina, claim. And at this point, therefore, the Jewish people were prepared to bask in the light of the world, this eternal light. And behold, on this night, all that this is reawakened, is mischadesh, is renewed and reawakened. What was done as it was done in the beginning, and this is the essential help to the geula achrona sheta'aseh, which will take place. In other words, apart from us being elevated by this process, our elevation and the recreation of that hashpah, that influence, that situation of the Seder, passing through that period, that portal of time, will eventually bring the Geula Shlema. However, the main point of the Seder depends on four things, and they are Pesach, Matzah, Moror, and the four kosses. Pesach, Pesach, Paschal Lamb, Matzah, Moror, bitter herbs, and the four cups. And now we will explain these ideas, these concepts. So he says the idea of the tziruf, of the smelting literally, of the exile, the process by which the Jewish people were purified through their sufferings, we already explained. And this is what purified the Jewish people and took out of them the zuama. Zuama literally means filth. He's talking about the spiritual filth that was created by Adam Rishon at the beginning of time by ingesting the fruit of the forbidden fruit. So that zuama, that spiritual impurity, that filth literally, was taken out of them, smelted out of them by the suffering. In order that they should be able to receive the light of holiness. And that, of course, is the idea of the moror. Now, even though moror nowadays is only the Rabbanon, but it still has on its own level that effect. We reinforce that idea. Because it says in the Pasuk, V'yamaru es chayehim, the Egyptians embittered the lives of the Jewish people. However, when it came for the time for them to be redeemed, it required for their redemption a revelation of the light of the holiness of Hashem. And so to speak, I kind of think of it as a beam being radiated down from Shemaim that they were able to grasp onto. And into that holiness, they were able to, like a rope, like you see I was being rescued, when these helicopter pilots come down, they drop this rope, that the Jewish people were given this rope that they could cling onto that would pull them out of the morass, of the mire. And that their souls would cleave to, the souls of Jewish people would cleave to, and they would be literally being drawn after it. And they would be elevated from their lowness, their lowliness, and separated from the tumah, the spiritual impurity in which they were wallowing, and that was done through the Korban Pesach. In other words, even though through the moror, the bitterness, the suffering, they were purified, but they lacked some positive valence which needed to kind of drag them out. They were in a state of neutrality. If you like, it is a case of sumei rav aseh tov. The Surmei Ra, the Ra had been taken out of them, but the Aseh Tov, the positive mitzvah of the Paschal Lamb, of the Korban Pesach, gave them an irradiation of spirituality which allowed their souls to travel up through this, a positive action. Ubo na'amar lehem, mishchu k'chu lechem. It says in the Torah, mishchu, withdraw your hands from idolatry, uk'chu lechem, and take for yourself the Paschal Lamb. So, mishchu uk'chu, it's actually, the Pasuk is talking about taking the lamb, but mishchu is a loshon of withdrawal. So why does it say withdraw? Take your hands away from avodah zarah, Chazal darshan. As it says, Shepirish Zal mishchu yedechem me'odavoza uk'chu lechem tzon shel mitzvah. Take to yourself the lamb of mitzvah. Okay, so those are the two things we now discussed. Bitter herbs, that's the suffering. The Korban Pesach, that is the positive valence which actually finally pulls them out. However, apart from this, the Jewish people their bodies needed to be ready and prepared to receive this light. And in order to do that, their bodies had to be nourished for 7 days of the year with matzah, which is food, which is totally Yetzer Tov. It has no Yetzer Hara in it at all. That's the matzah. The matzah, as we know, is maybe we'll come back to that. If you remind me afterwards, the idea of the matzah. But the matzah is the spiritual food. It's Yetzer Tov food, and it fixes within a person the spirituality that he's received through doing the other mitzvahs of the Seder. The Morah, Korban Pesach, we don't have at the moment. And it is a feeding, and being fed in this way through these days, there remains the effect, this good effect for all of the year to be drawn towards Kedusha. In other words, the eating of the matzah fixes within our neshamas the experience of the Seder all year round. Now, we'll see in the Derech Hashem, the question is, okay, if it's so great, why don't we eat it all the year round? We'll come back to that. However, let's just finish off here on the Maimon Chochmah. However, the idea of the 4 kosses, the 4 cups, is that it's known that the madrega of the Sitra Achra, the other side, the dark side, the side that stands against Kedusha, the Yetzer Hara, there are 4. We've spoken about this many times in previous meetings. That's the 4 exiles. That's the idea of the Olam de Piruda, the world of separation, which comes away from the central point. 4 are the number of the exiles of the Jewish people, which each one of them represents a certain evil force. And each one of those forces, of those 4 forces, dominated as a result of the Chet of Adam Arishan, and all of them stood in opposition to holiness and the good in order that it should not be found in the world. And the Jewish people were, so to speak, locked in these 4 klipot, these 4 exiles, these 4 powers of obfuscation of the light, that they weren't able to escape from them, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu shone upon them with his great power and broke these 4 klipot, these 4 shells, and brought out the Jewish people from their midst. And that's the idea of the 4 redemptions, the 4 cups which are mentioned in the Pasha. Each one of those 4 klipot, the 4 exiles of Babylon, Porus and Modai, Persia and Media, Greece and Rome, stand for those 4. And each one of them, maybe if we have time at the end, we'll go into those a little more deeply. Anyway, Mitzrayim, Egypt, is really stands outside of them and is the source for all of them. That is and this is something which is an ongoing process, something we haven't totally dominated. He says, he doesn't say it here, but he says it somewhere else, that is really the idea of the 4 letters of Hashem's name. The 4 letters of Hashem's name are the 4 stand in opposition to the four klipot. And when all these klipot are broken, eventually the light of the supernal light of Kedusha will shine in the world. There'll be a revelation of everything the way it really is. Mitzrayim is not part of the four exiles, it's the source of the four exiles. I'm not going to go into that now, but it stands outside them. Now, the final domination, the final conquest of these four powers of evil has not yet happened. That's going to happen in the time to come. However, it's like he brings a mashal here of a wood chopper who's chopping down a tree. You can't chop a tree down all at once. Every Seder that we go through is chopping a little bit away at that tree. And if we want to extend our parable, it could be that that tree, the tree of evil, so to speak, the domination of the Sitra Achra, of the four exiles, is really right now hanging on very, very thin, a thin part of the tree. And all we have to do is just to chop that little bit down. Again, we can't do anything like Avram Avinu or Yitzhak or Moshe, but that little bit that's left, which is stopping the final revelation, from the final Yeshua, from Mashiach, from coming, that is something that's within our power. And every year, says the Ramchal, just turn over the page, every Shana V'Shana, Misorim B'koach Ha'or, we strengthen the power of the light that it should shine, and the tikkun, the fixing, which will be repaired, the fixed and strengthened to lengthen this thing, to extend this thing until it finally gets to its conclusion. And in the end, the four klipos will be turned upon themselves, and the ummahs of the world will be destroyed, and they will be the four cups of punishment of them, and the Jewish people will have the four cups of redemption. Okay.
Will the nations of the world be destroyed?
That's what he says here. Destroyed in terms of their power, their domination. Ad sheyigam v'hinei sof hakol Hashem hadal klipos atzman tisafechno ala umos v'ta'abdeno oison. It says they'll be destroyed. I mean, I don't think it means wiped out. It means their power. Now, let's just shoot over to Derech Hashem, where he also talks about Pesach in a more concise form. He really talks about the matzah here, which I wanted to get to, which is the question. If matzah is so great, if it's so spiritual, how come we don't eat it all the year round? So he says, talking about the idea of chometz and matzah. Inyan chometz and matzah who is that until the Jewish people came out of Egypt, the Jewish people, as we said before, were misoravim, were mixed up, mitbolel, were assimilated into the nations of the world. They were a goy b'kerev goy, a nation in the midst of another nation. And in their exodus, in their taking them out, they were redeemed and separated. And up till this point in time, all the aspects of the body of man were darkness. And darkness and zuama, we used this word before, spiritual filth, which dominated on mankind. And with the Jewish people's redemption from Egypt, they were separated and they were appointed, and their bodies became readied to become purified, and they were prepared for Torah and Avodah. Of course, this whole process, remember, is going to lead us up to Har Sinai and becoming Hashem's nation. And for this reason, they were commanded to remove the chometz and to eat the matzah. And that is because bread, which is prepared to feed man, is equated in truth with the desired situation of a person. that's the way. I'll come back to that. V'he'inyan, the idea of chimutz, of leavening, is something which is natural in bread. That it should be easy to digest and it should have a good taste. That is this world. That it should be easy and it should be tasty. And Hinei gam hu nimshach lefi hachok harui ba'odam. This is the natural state of the way a man should be. The man also needs that it should be, he should have a yetzer hara and an inclination towards physicality. What he's saying here is basically the idea that man has to have choice. Man has to have a natiyah, a desire for these things. That's natural in a person, that he should have a yetzer hara. A person who doesn't have a yetzer hara is not a human being. However, for a certain special period of time, miyuchad mushua, mushua here means kind of limited or measured length of time, it was necessary for the Jewish people to refrain from chametz and to be nourished only on matzah. That it should be that from its taste, that it should minimize within them the power of the yetzer hara and the inclination to physicality. And it should dominate on themselves this closeness to spirituality. However, and this is the answer to the question, in order to be nourished the entire year is impossible. Because this is not the requirement of this world. That's not how this world was designed. This world was designed, as a place where there is a yetzer hara, and the person is supposed to challenge that yetzer hara, to harness that yetzer hara, b'chol levavecha. It's not to be removed. However, for these certain measured days, it's fitting that this idea of this purity of the rejection of physicality should be guarded, and through this, the Jewish people should be elevated to the level which is fitting for them. This is the idea, the essential idea of the Chag HaMatzos, the festival of Pesach. And the rest of the mitzvahs of the night, of the first night, are all matters, separate matters, which are parallel to the various individual aspects of this redemption. Okay, this is one more thing I want to fill in, which he doesn't talk about here, which is the four cups. As we said, the four cups represent the four exiles, and the four exiles are historically, each of the four exiles represent an element. There's a concept we can divide the physical world into four elements, and they also are parallel to a negative attribute, and we're going to see that matzah is the antidote, so to speak, for each of those negative attributes. So the first exile is Babylon. So Babylon is connected with fire. Fire is the desire to rise up. So that's the idea of kavod, of honor seeking. It's also connected with kina, jealousy, because jealousy is something where somebody you feel is getting more than you're getting. So the negative attribute, which is represented by fire, which is Babel, is gaiva, is haughtiness, pride. So the positive corollary of that is humility. And if we look at the matzah is low. It's the opposite of bread, which is puffed up. The next exile along the line is Paros Modai. Paros Modai is connected with the element of mayim, of water. Water is the source of all pleasure. Chazal teaches, if you look at the Romans, all over the place, the Romans created bathhouses as their culture. It was an idea of pampering oneself, of pleasure. That was the Persians. So, mayim, Paros is keneged taiva, taste. So the opposite of that negative attribute of taiva, of desire, is to be histapek b'muat, is to be satisfied with the minimum, not to seek more and more, greater, more tasty, more expensive, more luxurious, to settle for what is ever, with the minimum, whatever I need and no more.
But that's how you fight.
Taiva. Taiva, the opposite of taiva is to be satisfied with a minimum amount.
So that means it's like practically, like if you're like eating food or whatever, you should like basically try to eat like whatever the minimum is and not try to like go crazy on the flavors and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good way of working on it. Of course, Shabbos is different. On Shabbos, you're supposed to have the oneg of the food. That's the whole subject, how Shabbos has the power to change physicality into spirituality in a way that the rest of the week can't do. But a person doesn't have to have, what's it, Baskin Robbins, how many flavors?
31.
26? I'm sure they'll,
Never mind, you guys are right.
It's not in the 20s, it's definitely in the 30s.
31. I'm sure they'll find another few to be on. But a person doesn't have to have all 36 or 31, whatever Baskin Robbins flavors. If a person says, this week I'm just going to taste one, maybe I won't even have ice cream at all this week, I don't know.
Yeah.
But the idea is to be, a person doesn't have to be
According to that logic, should a person never have ice cream or they're going to burn out? You're saying?
Say again?
That would be if they have no desire ever.
No. I'm saying the whole point is to try to decrease your desire, and what feeds your desire? Having all different foods and keep having more and more.
Right.
So I'm saying, according to that logic, shouldn't a person strive to just like never have ice cream besides for Shabbos?
I mean, again, it's all according to your level. If a person is going
You don't
to,
want to bite off too much.
right? It's the same. The same look. If a person needs a packet of chips, they once asked for Moshe Feinstein when potato chips came out. I guess a relatively new invention.
Okay.
I mean, relatively, but they asked him what the bracha was on potato chips. He said Hadama. But how can a person make a bracha on taivas? We don't think of a bag of potato chips as something which is like, well, maybe we do. I mean, I guess you call it comfort food.
Yeah.
Okay, but you know something? Sometimes a person does need comfort. If you're going to get a nice cube of chocolate at 4 o'clock in the afternoon where you don't feel like learning and it makes you go back in there and learn for another couple of hours, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. So a person has to know, why am I doing this? Is this going to help me in my avodas Hashem? A person has to look at everything in his life in that way. And of course, it's very easy to fool yourself.
Right.
So, but you have to be honest with yourself, I mean, there's, okay, so that's Taiva, that's Persia. And of course, if you think about it,
So Persia is Taiva?
Persia is Taiva, is Parasumodai. And if you think about it, coming back to matzah is not as tasty as bread. Although I think a lot of people actually quite like the taste of matzah. But it's not because it's tasty. It maybe has a certain, I don't know, flavor, but it's not sort of,
It's like an experience.
it's not exactly, what's that stuff they put in Chinese food?
Yeah, it's not MSG.
It's not MSG, right? It's not something, or unbelievable these foods they have now, with the Doritos with the fire, right? Whatever. I guess people get more and more jaded, so they have to up the ante. They have to more and more. Anyway, that's a whole subject by itself. But now the next one is Yovan. Yovan is Greece. Remember, Greece is an intellectual attack on the Torah, and so Yovan is Keneged Avir, the element of air. And obviously the nation, the bad aspects of air are Lashon Hara.
So what's the element for Taiva?
Taiva is water. That's water, that's Persia. And air is the idea of Lashon Hara, nivel peh, obscenity, breath, it's to do with the... And obviously the counteracting to that is Dibur, Hanochon, correct speech. Speaking in a way which is empowering to people, encouraging to people, not soiling one's mouth, obviously, with obscenity of any kind, or even hinting at obscenity. Encouraging speech, for sure, definitely Torah, tefillah, all of the things that you can use air for to ennoble yourself in the world. And that, coming back to our matzah, and we'll finish with this, is that the air, I guess it's not the matzah is not pumped up. I mean, we also said that about bovel, about gaiva, but yeah. I missed out something actually. I'm sorry, which we didn't get to Rome. So Rome is the fourth of the exiles. Rome is connected the element of earth. Yeah. Earth is connected with immobility. It's connected the bad midas of atzlus and atzvus. Atzlus means laziness, and atzvus means sadness. Interestingly enough, they have almost exactly the identical letters. The lamed of atzlus becomes the base of atzvus. Laziness and sadness. If you notice that people, when they're sad, they kind of move and everything becomes really dangerous. Difficult for them. They're slothful, they're sad, they're slow. And that's the idea of Rome, which is sinks down, it's offer. And of course the counter, the counterweight, the opposite of that is zrizut, alacrity, doing things with dispatch as quickly as you can. And of course, that's matzah. Why? Because matzah has to be baked within 18 minutes. If you are tardy with matzah, you get chometz.
You realize the difference between sadness? It's not really so congruent, but just maybe cool if you could come up with anything with it. But so sadness is beis and lamed is lamed, so it's 30 minus 2 is 28. Kolach.
Okay.
So, I don't know if there's anything there.
All right. I mean, okay. If you have any questions, I'll answer them. But just to sum up, that's if you can just keep that in your mind, because as I say, the Seder is very often extremely distracting, and very often, the question when do we eat and all the kind of other stuff that goes along with the Seder, just the sheer mechanics of it, can be very difficult for a person to focus on what he's really trying to get out of it. And this is the Ramchal's principle, and we'll say it one more time, that my body is being changed by the experience of the Seder, of the mitzvahs of the Seder. Not just a spirit, this is an actual thing. This is not a
wives' tale?
No, it's not just symbolic. This is not symbolic. What we're doing now is not symbolic. This is actual. This is changing who I am. This is changing my body into a more spiritual vessel to receive the light, to radiate the light, and that is what's happening to me right now at this Seder. Okay, have a wonderful Seder, guys.
Wait, so